I said to my grandmother, "Grandma, who's Jane Austen?" And she said, "Well, she's a novelist." And I said, "Are we related to her?" And she laughed and said, "No." And I said, "Well, you seem to know her. And, you know, my other grandma seems to know her." And Grandma said, "If you read her books, you feel like you know her."
She's our beacon. She's our shining light. I don't know, what does Mozart give young musicians of today? It's inestimable, isn't it? And I sort of feel that way about Jane Austen. I mean, how do you count that? How do you count genius? How do you count that courage and that ability? I don't count it, I think. I just sort of try to absorb it and love it the way it needs to be loved.
I love Jane Austen for the same reason that I really love Shakespeare, because they explore every possible condition of the human person.
I think one of the reasons that Jane Austen still speaks to us today, that still has resonance or seems so fresh and modern, is because she was ahead of her time.
She makes you the best reader you could possibly be. To get everything probably takes a lifetime. This is why we come back again and again and again and again and again.
In high school, we had to read Pride and Prejudice, and I loved it. It was terrific. It was my favorite novel I had to read in high school. Since I went to an all-boy military high school, I didn't tell too many of my buddies that. I would have wound up stuffed into a locker, but I loved it. I loved the plot, the characters, everything.
My grandmother made me read Pride and Prejudice when I was about 15.
Well, at 15 years old and a hormonal teenager, I just read them as love stories. They were an extension to the teen magazines I was devouring at the time.
My first experience with Jane Austen was watching the dramatization of Pride and Prejudice that was on PBS. It was the old BBC version from 1980, so I'm dating myself.
I was a college student traveling in Europe and a poor college student. And so there was no money. This is in 1971. There was no money for expensive entertainment, so reading books was the way I entertained myself at night. And when you're traveling in foreign countries and you go to a bookstore to the English section, typically all you find are classic novels. And so Jane Austen, I of course knew of her, but I started reading and then proceeded to read my way through the whole canon.
As a teenager, I loved reading, and I read Jane Austen, particularly the period romantic bit about it.
I was introduced to Jane Austen in high school. Pride and Prejudice was one of our assigned readings, and so that was the very first time I picked up the book, which I'm guessing is not true for you.
I don't remember a time in my life before I had watched the 6-hour version of Pride and Prejudice. So it was just kind of always a story I knew. It's like The Little Mermaid and The Lion King and Pride and Prejudice.
I was forced to read it. In college, I only took science courses, but all pre-medical students were forced to take a humanities class. I looked down the list, I saw English literature, then we got to Jane Austen, and I was absolutely in love. And we read Pride and Prejudice. I thought it was the most delightful language and the bantering that went on. I just loved it, and then I just have been reading Jane Austen ever since.
The first thing that struck me about Jane Austen was her sense of humor. She's very funny. She has a real understanding of human nature, and that leads her to create such memorable characters. I can remember the first sentence in Pride and Prejudice that really got me hooked. There has been a ball the night before. This is a few chapters into the first volume of the novel. And the narrator says that the Miss Bennets and the Miss Lucases should get together to talk over a ball was absolutely necessary. And it's kind of a throwaway line in the book, but it made me realize this is someone who really understands human nature. Everybody likes to go to a party, but it's almost more fun to get together the next day and chew it over. And I also realized from that it's about storytelling. We love to tell stories, and we love to make our lives interesting through the way we tell stories about each other.
There was a wonderful man in the 18th century, Georg Christian Lichtenberg, who came over to England, and he said a wonderful thing. He said, everybody can write a perfect sentence once a year, he said, but geniuses just do it closer together. and you have perfect sentence after perfect sentence after perfect sentence that you're just dazzled by. And I'm one of the people who writes one perfect sentence a year, and that makes me happy.
When I am doing research, I do historical research, and they are little time capsules. You know, they're little miniature worlds there, and you can look around in them and take them apart, and there's all kinds of historical detail and interest in them.
You can bring your background into the novel. I tend to be prejudiced when I read a novel about the medical aspects. And because of that, I get a lot more of the undercurrents in the novel that Jane Austen was trying to bring out about different aspects of health. Same thing, their work on astronomy in Jane Austen's novels, the law, teaching and education. So each reader, that's just another reason her work is so applicable to so many people, is that you can really read it from various aspects and enjoy it.
And she knew so well what she was talking about. And
she
for our astronomy
did.
presentation, we looked at she mentioned specific stars in a specific spot, and we pulled up the star maps from that exact, well, we knew about a month range in that year where they would be, what direction they were facing, and it's exactly what she said.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like she could have Googled the star maps. So.
And in Sense and Sensibility, when she lets Marianne Dashwood get deathly ill, she describes that illness in absolute perfect medical terms, even more specific than most doctors would have.
There's always more to be found. There's a sense of exploration. You think, oh, I didn't really appreciate that phrase before. I didn't really get it. And of course, Emma is the prime example of that, because it's a detective story. And you glide into it, and you're having fun, and you're reading along, and then you get to the end, and you suddenly realize you got it all wrong, because Emma got it all wrong, and you're seeing it through her eyes. So then you go back to the beginning again, and you read it again, and you see all the clues that you missed. It's that kind of experience I think is extraordinary.
Jane Austen is a novelist who speaks to the domestic scene, but she speaks to the domestic scene, the roles of men and women, the roles of society in the Regency era, or the late Georgian era.
It's interesting to me that Jane Austen herself, just like her characters, turned down proposals of marriage that would have brought her comfort. They would have been practical decisions. But she was, I think, essentially we see the beginnings of the modern woman, where she makes her own decisions for her own self and lives her own life as she wants to.
I think that a lot of young women have found a lot of confidence and a lot of ability to laugh at things that would otherwise have probably crushed and melted them or ground them into a fine paste. And I think that's the real beauty of Austen, is that she's able to laugh at things. And somehow I think everything is easier to bear when you can laugh at it. And I think laughing gives you a certain courage. I'm sure it gave her a lot of courage to say things under the guise of a joke that you probably wouldn't be as well received if you said it in a serious way.
Jasmine to me is very exciting because of a group of people who have shared sensibilities, shared love of Jane Austen, a shared love of the Regency period, all come together and give us a chance to talk about the history, Jane Austen's novels, and give us this shared feeling of community that is very rare in today's world. Janeites cannot be put into a box. There are all kinds of people who come to this conference. There are scholars of Austen, there are historians, there are sociologists and psychologists, and there are plenty of people who have read her books and just enjoy them. But there are also people who come because they're interested in the costumes of the period and living as though they're in the period. The variety of people who come is just astonishing. Especially the people who are interested in period dress. enjoy the ball more than anything else at the conference because they have the opportunity not only to dress in beautiful clothing, but they also have the opportunity to behave as though they were in the Regency period. And behavior was very different in the Regency period. It was much more elegant, much more polite. While there's a lot of giggling at our balls, people make an effort to act as though they were dancing in the Regency period. And I think they enjoy that very, very much.
The thing is that a lot of the new ideas about Jane Austen go through the Jane Austen Society of North America. And I just find that thrilling. And it's very congenial to be with a lot of people who share the same interest as you do and care about the same things as you do. And sometimes my friends tease me and say, well, it sounds like a Grateful Dead convention. And I think, no, you don't understand. There are the dress-ups and there are some similarities. But it's book-based. It's not a hobby. It's not it's probably an obsession. But it's such a value one, and there's so much to it. There's always more to explore, always more to find out. That's what I like about the Jane Austen Society.
The society is just a fun place to be.
It's the author that brings us there, but it's the friendships that keep us coming.
She's such an integral part of my life. I know there are people who live lives without Jane Austen, but I am not one of them. No, I can't imagine life without Jane Austen.